The August heat was already pressing against the windows of Margaret Chen's suburban Denver home when she heard the familiar rumble of her son's BMW pulling into the driveway. At 58, Margaret had learned to read the subtle signs that preceded her 32-year-old son's visits. The way he parked crooked and hurried told her this wasn't a social call. Mom. Perfect timing. Jake burst through the front door without knocking, his voice carrying that artificially cheerful tone she'd come to dread. Behind him bounded an enormous German Shepherd mix, tongue lolling, eyes wild with excitement. Margaret looked up from her morning crossword, coffee mug frozen halfway to her lips. Jake, what this is, Rex? Jake announced, as if presenting a gift rather than a 90-pound ball of fur and energy. Isn't he gorgeous? I got him from this rescue 3 weeks ago. Pure German Shepherd and Husky mix the shelter. Said he's got tons of personality. Rex, as if responding to his introduction, immediately began sniffing every corner of Margaret's immaculate living room. His tail, thick as a baseball bat, swept a ceramic lamp from the side table. It crashed to the hardwood floor with a sound that made Margaret's eye twitch. Jake, she said slowly, setting down her mug with deliberate control. Why is there a dog in my house? That's the thing, Mom. Remember how I told you about the promotion at the tech firm? Well, they're sending me to London for a client presentation. 3 weeks? Can you believe it? The Savoy Hotel, first-class flights, the whole 9 yards. Jake was already moving toward the kitchen, Rex trailing behind him, leaving muddy paw prints on the pristine tiles Margaret had mopped just yesterday. That's wonderful, honey. But what does that have to? So I need you to watch Rex while I'm gone. The words tumbled out in a rush. I know it's short notice, but you're the only person I trust. Plus, you're home all the time since you retired, so it's perfect. Margaret felt her blood pressure rising. Jake, I never agreed to the flight. Leaves in 4 hours. Jake was already pulling dog food, toys, and supplies from what appeared to be a hastily packed duffel bag. I've got everything he needs right here. Food bowls, leash, his favorite rope toyo, and he loves to play fetch in the backyard. You still have that tennis ball from when I was a kid, right? Rex, meanwhile, had discovered Margaret's prized orchid collection on the windowsill. With one enthusiastic wag of his tail, 3 pots crashed to the floor, sending soil and delicate purple petals across the kitchen. Jake. Margaret's voice cracked like a whip, but her son was already heading back to his car. Rex, be good for Grandma. The BMW's engine roared to life before Margaret could form a coherent response. She stood in her doorway, still in her bathrobe and slippers, watching her son's taillights disappear around the corner. Rex sat beside her, panting happily, apparently oblivious to the destruction he'd already caused. This is not happening, Margaret muttered, but Rex's responding bark suggested otherwise. The first sign that her life had just taken a dramatic turn came 30 minutes later when Rex discovered the garbage disposal. The mechanical worry sent him into a frenzy of protective barking that echoed through the house like air raid sirens. Margaret's neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, appeared at the fence. Margaret, is everything all right? It sounds like you're being attacked by wolves. Just temporary dog sitting, Margaret called back. Her voice strained as she tried to coax Rex away from the kitchen appliances. Oh, how lovely. I didn't know you were getting a pet. Margaret smiled tightly. Neither did I. By noon, Rex had relocated Margaret's favorite throw pillows to create what appeared to be a nest in the living room. Discovered that toilet paper unrolls beautifully when grabbed and run with, and somehow managed to open the refrigerator and drag out an entire package of lunch meat. Margaret found herself Googling emergency dog boarding Denver while Rex systematically investigated every corner of her house with the thoroughness of a D agent. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jake. Boarding the plane. London, here I come. Rex is going to love having so much space to run around. Margaret typed and deleted 17 different responses before settling on, we need to talk when you land. Jake's reply came immediately. Can't talk? Now. They're calling for boarding. You're going to be fine. Rex is super easy. Easy. Margaret looked at Rex, who was now attempting to dig a hole in her Persian rug, and wondered if they were talking about the same animal. The afternoon brought new adventures. Rex's interpretation of house-trained apparently meant he understood the concept but chose to implement it selectively. Margaret found herself cleaning accidents while simultaneously trying to prevent Rex from eating her houseplants, all while fielding concerned calls from neighbors who weren't used to hearing constant barking from the Chen residents. Maybe he's just anxious about the new environment, suggested Dr. Williams from the local veterinary clinic when Margaret called in desperation. Try keeping him calm, establish a routine, and remember, dogs can sense your stress. Margaret looked at Rex, who was at that moment attempting to drag her sofa cushions outside through the dog door. Jake had apparently installed without asking. I think my stress is pretty justified. The evening routine proved even more challenging. Rex's idea of dinner time involved enthusiasm that bordered on violence. He attacked his food bowl like he'd been starving for weeks, sending kibble flying across the kitchen. When Margaret tried to clean up, Rex decided this was an invitation to play, grabbing the mop handle and engaging in a tug-of-war that ended with Margaret on her backside and Rex victorious as darkness fell over Denver. Margaret surveyed the damage to her once pristine home. Muddy paw prints decorated every surface. Her carefully arranged living room looked like it had been hit by a tornado. The kitchen showed evidence of Rex's creative approach to hydration apparently. He preferred drinking from the faucet directly, leaving water everywhere. But it was the howling that finally broke her. Rex began his nighttime serenade at 11 p.m. sharp. Margaret had naively assumed that a day of exploration and destruction would tire him out. Instead, Rex seemed to interpret bedtime as the beginning of his shift as neighborhood watch commander. Every car that passed, every rustling leaf, every distant siren prompted a response that sounded like a cross between a fire alarm and a grieving wail. Margaret tried everything, closing curtains, playing classical music, even attempting to comfort Rex with soothing words. "Rex, please," she whispered at 2 a.m., kneeling beside his impromptu bed in the living room. "Some of us need sleep." Rex looked at her with what might have been sympathy, then resumed howling. By dawn, Margaret had managed perhaps 2 hours of sleep. Her neighbor's porch lights had been on all night, and she was certain she'd be receiving noise complaints by breakfast time. Jake's cheerful text arrived at 6 a.m. Denver time. "London is amazing. Just checked into the Savoy. This place is incredible. How's my boy doing?" Margaret stared at the message while Rex engaged in his morning ritual of rearranging the living room furniture. She began typing, "Jake, this isn't working." Rex sneezed but before she could finish. Rex discovered that the vacuum cleaner made interesting sounds when knocked over, and Margaret's phone went flying as she lunged to prevent him from potentially electrocuting himself. When she finally retrieved her phone, she found 3 more messages from Jake, photos of his luxurious hotel suite, the view of the Thames, and his room service breakfast spread. "Living the dream," his final message read. "Thanks again for watching, Rex. I owe you big time." Margaret looked around her destroyed home, then at Rex, who was now attempting to squeeze his massive frame into her reading chair, apparently under the impression that if he couldn't see her, she couldn't see him. Something cold and determined settled in Margaret's chest. Jake thought he was living the dream. She was about to show him what dreams could turn into nightmares. Margaret picked up her phone and began making calls. The first was to her travel agent. "Hi, Sarah. It's Margaret Chen. I need to book a flight to London tonight if possible, and I'll need a hotel recommendation somewhere. Very nice. Money is no object." Rex looked up from his unsuccessful attempt at camouflage, tail wagging as if he sensed adventure ahead. "That's right, boy," Margaret said grimly. "We're going to visit your dad." Margaret's travel agent, Sarah Williams, had been handling the Chen family's vacation arrangements for over a decade. She was accustomed to Margaret's typically modest requests: domestic flights to visit relatives, occasional weekend getaways to mountain resorts. So when Margaret called requesting immediate first-class accommodations to London, Sarah assumed there was a family emergency. "Of course, Margaret. I'm so sorry to hear about the situation. Let me see what I can do for tonight's flights." Margaret didn't correct Sarah's assumption. There was indeed a family situation that required immediate attention. "I'll also need pet travel arrangements," Margaret added. "International transport for a large dog. Oh my, that's quite involved for emergency travel." "The paperwork alone cost is not a concern," Margaret interrupted, a edge of steel in her voice that made Rex's ears perk up from across the room. "Whatever it takes." While Sarah worked her magic with airlines and international pet transport companies, Margaret began the second phase of her plan. She pulled out her laptop and began researching the Savoy Hotel, where Jake was currently enjoying his company. Vacation. The Savoy's website painted a picture of luxury that made Margaret's jaw clench. Afternoon tea service, Riverview Suites, world-class restaurants, all while she'd spent the night cleaning up after his dog and listening to noise complaints from neighbors. But it was the hotel's pet policy that made Margaret smile for the first time in 24 hours. "The Savoy welcomes well-behaved pets," she read aloud to Rex, who tilted his head as if following along. "Additional fees apply for pet accommodation and any damages incurred during stay." Rex wagged his tail, apparently approving of the plan. Phone rang. "Margaret, it's Sarah. I have good news and challenging news. Let's hear it." "The good news is, I found you a first-class seat on tonight's 8 p.m. British Airways flight to London. The challenging news is the pet transport situation. International travel with animals requires advanced veterinary documentation. health certificates, and what if I told you the dog already has current vaccinations and health records? Margaret had found Rex's paperwork in the supplies Jake had hastily dumped. What's the fastest this could be arranged? There was a pause. If everything's in order, I have a contact at a specialized pet transport service. They handle emergency situations for celebrities and diplomatic families. It's expensive, but they can work miracles. Do it? Margaret, are you sure about this? The total cost for same-day, international pet transport and first-class accommodations could be Sarah. I haven't taken a real vacation in 5 years. I think I'm due. While Sarah coordinated the travel arrangements, Margaret tackled the practical challenges. Rex needed to be crated for international travel, which meant a trip to the pet store for a giant airline-approved carrier. The sight of Margaret wrestling an enormous plastic crate into her sedan, while Rex supervised from the back seat, would have been comical under different circumstances. "We're really doing this, aren't we?" she asked Rex as they drove home. Rex barked once, which Margaret chose to interpret as enthusiastic agreement. The afternoon flew by in a whirlwind of preparation. Margaret packed with military precision comfortable clothes for dog wrangling, her best outfits for making an impression, and most importantly, every official document she could think of. Property deeds, insurance papers, financial records, everything that represented the stability and security Jake took for granted. Her phone buzzed constantly with updates from Sarah's pet transport contact. Veterinary inspection complete. Health certificates processed. Crate inspection passed. Ready for airport pickup at 4 p.m. Jake's messages continued to arrive like salt in the wound. Photos of his gourmet lunch, his afternoon stroll along the Thames, his plans for theater tickets. Each message ended with casual questions about Rex's behavior, as if Margaret were providing a service rather than dealing with an unwanted responsibility. Rex being good for Grandma? Hope he's not too much trouble. Thinking about getting him a sister when I get back. What do you think? Margaret nearly threw her phone across the room at that last message. At 3 p.m. Margaret stood in her destroyed living room, suitcase in hand, reviewing the devastation. Muddy paw prints tracked across every surface. Her furniture bore new scratches and teeth marks. The Persian rug she'd saved for 3 years to buy now had an irreparable hole in the center, but it was her orchid collection, or what remained of it, that crystallized her resolve. 20 years of careful cultivation reduced to scattered soil and broken pottery. Rex appeared beside her, apparently ready for adventure, his leash in his mouth. "You know what, Rex?" Margaret said, scratching behind his ears. "I think it's time your daddy learned what responsibility really means." The ride to the airport was surprisingly peaceful. Rex, perhaps sensing the gravity of the situation, sat quietly in his travel crate watching Denver disappear through the car window. Margaret's pet transport contact, an efficient woman named Diana, handled every detail with professional competence. "First time flying with a dog?" Diana asked as they navigated the airport's pet processing area. "First time doing a lot of things," Margaret replied grimly. The British Airways first-class cabin was everything Margaret had imagined, and more. Spacious seats that converted to beds, attentive service, and a level of luxury that made her understand why Jake had been so excited about his company's travel budget. Below, in the climate-controlled cargo area, Rex was settling in for his own first-class journey as the plane taxied toward takeoff. Margaret composed a text to Jake, having some house issues. May need to travel unexpectedly. Will keep you posted. Jake's response came immediately. "Oh no, nothing serious, I hope. Don't worry about Rexy's, probably loving having the whole house to himself." Margaret turned off her phone and settled back into her seat. In 8 hours she would arrive in London. Jake thought Rex was back in Denver, enjoying the run of her house. He was about to discover just how wrong he could be. The flight attendant appeared with champagne and warm nuts. "First time to London." Margaret accepted the champagne and allowed herself a small smile. "First time taking control of my life." As the lights of Denver faded below, Margaret began planning exactly how she would deliver the lesson her son so desperately needed. The Savoy's concierge service would be essential. She would need to time everything perfectly. Jake wanted to live like there were no consequences. Margaret was about to show him what consequences looked like when they caught up with you at 30,000 feet and refused to be ignored. Rex was probably sleeping peacefully in his travel crate below, but Margaret suspected he was going to love London. Especially the Savoy. The morning London drizzle matched Margaret's mood perfectly as her taxi pulled up to the Savoy's iconic entrance. After 8 hours in first class and another 2 navigating Heathrow's pet customs procedures, she felt simultaneously exhausted and electrified with purpose. Rex, remarkably well behaved during the entire journey, sat alertly in his travel crate, taking in the sounds and smells of his new environment. "Blimey, that's a big dog," commented the taxi driver, helping Margaret unload Rex's crate and her luggage. "Holiday with the family, is it?" "Something like that," Margaret replied, tipping generously. The Savoy's doorman, resplendent in his traditional uniform, approached with professional discretion. "Madam, welcome to the Savoy. I believe you're expected," Margaret had called ahead. During her layover, speaking directly with the hotel's guest services manager, the conversation had been enlightening. "Yes, I'm Margaret Chen. I believe my son Jake Chen is already a guest here." "Indeed, madam. Mr. Chen checked in yesterday. Room 847, River Suite. Shall I ring up to announce your arrival?" "That won't be necessary," Margaret said smoothly. "I'd like to surprise him, but first, I'll need to check into my own accommodation." Margaret had spared no expense. The royal suite, she'd learned, was the Savoy's most prestigious accommodation. Above Jake's room, the symbolic positioning felt perfect. As they entered the opulent lobby, Rex's crate wheels clicking against the marble floors, Margaret caught sight of familiar laughter from the American bar. Through the crowd, she spotted Jake, relaxed and animated, regaling a group of well-dressed business associates with what appeared to be a very entertaining story. Double quotes, ... "And the best part is, my mom actually loves dogs," Jake was saying, gesturing with his whiskey glass. "She's been talking about getting a pet for years, but never pulled the trigger. I figured Rex would be perfect for her, give her something to focus on now that she's retired. Win-win situation." Margaret's grip tightened on Rex's leash as several pieces of information clicked into place. This wasn't Jake's client presentation. This was a celebration. She could see the congratulatory body language, the expensive drinks, the self-satisfied grin on her son's face. "Madam?" The concierge's gentle voice brought her attention back. "Shall we proceed to your suite?" "Yes," Margaret said quietly. "And please arrange for a bottle of your finest champagne to be sent to Mr. Chen's room. No message, just the champagne." "Of course, madam. Any particular occasion?" Margaret's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "He's about to have a very memorable evening." The royal suite exceeded even Margaret's elevated expectations. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the Thames. Antique furnishings spoke of generations of luxury, and the marble bathroom was larger than most people's bedrooms. But Margaret barely noticed the opulence. She was focused on the suite's most important feature, the private balcony that overlooked the hotel's interior. Courtyard, including the balcony of room 847. Rex, finally released from his travel crate, explored the suite with the same thorough methodology he'd applied to Margaret's Denver home. But here, surrounded by museum-quality antiques and priceless artwork, his enthusiasm took on a different character entirely. "Easy, boy," Margaret murmured, watching Rex investigate a Louis XVI chair. "We're not here to destroy things, we're here to make a point." Margaret's phone buzzed with a text from Jake. "Weird, someone just sent champagne to my room," hotel said. It was from an anonymous well-wisher. "London people are so friendly," Margaret typed back. "How lovely, enjoy yourself." "Oh, I am. This place is incredible. Just had the most amazing dinner at their restaurant. Tomorrow I'm thinking about booking a spa day. Company card is getting a workout." Margaret set down her phone and began unpacking. Among her carefully selected items were several of Jake's childhood photo albums, his high school trophies, and a folder containing every birthday card, Christmas present receipt, and school expense report she'd kept over the years. The paper trail of unconditional parental support. But the most important item was the manila envelope containing the deed to her Denver home, the house where Jake had grown up, the property he casually used as free dog boarding, the foundation of security he took for granted. Margaret's plan was elegant in its simplicity. Jake needed to understand the true cost of responsibility, the weight of the obligations he'd been avoiding, and the consequences of treating others as conveniences rather than people. She opened the sliding door to her balcony and looked down at Jake's room below. The lights were on, and she could hear the murmur of voices. Apparently, Jake had invited his business associates up for drinks. Perfect. Margaret picked up the hotel phone and dialed the concierge. "This is Mrs. Chen in the royal suite. I'd like to arrange for a special delivery to room 847. "Certainly, madam. What would you like to send?" "It's rather unusual," Margaret said. "I have some important documents that need to be delivered personally, along with a companion animal that requires immediate attention. It's a family matter." The concierge, trained in the art of discretion and accustomed to unusual requests from wealthy guests, took the information in stride. "Of course, madam. What time would be convenient?" Margaret glanced at her watch. 9 p.m. London time. Jake would be in full celebration mode, surrounded by colleagues, feeling invincible in his luxury suite. Let's say 9:30. And please ensure that the delivery person is prepared for a large dog. German Shepherd mix, very energetic, requires constant supervision. Understood, madam. Will there be a message accompanying the delivery? Margaret considered this carefully. Yes. Tell Mr. Chen that his Denver responsibilities have caught up with him, and his mother has decided to take a real vacation for once. He should consider this a learning opportunity. Very good, madam. Will that be all? One more thing. I'll need the contact information for your best pet damage assessment service. Something tells me we're going to need it. After hanging up, Margaret prepared Rex for his starring role. She attached his leash and gathered the manila envelope containing her house deed. The symbolism was important. Jake had treated her home as his personal storage facility. Now he could take responsibility for what that home represented. As 9:30 approached, Margaret positioned herself on her balcony where she could observe the upcoming scene. Jake's room was directly below his French doors open to the evening air, voices and laughter drifting up from his impromptu party. The knock on Jake's door was precisely timed. Room service. Came the call. Margaret watched through Jake's open balcony doors as he approached his suite entrance. Champagne glass in hand, clearly expecting another anonymous gift from his London admirers. The door opened, Rex bounded into the room like a furry tornado, his leash trailing behind him as he immediately began investigating this new environment with characteristic enthusiasm. Jake's champagne glass hit the floor with a crystal crash that Margaret could hear clearly. From her perch above, "What the Rex? What are you doing here?" The delivery person, a consummate professional, simply handed Jake the manila envelope and retreated quickly. Closing the door behind him, Margaret could hear Jake's confused voice rising above the sudden chaos as Rex, apparently delighted to see his human, began his reunion celebration. The sound of expensive furniture being rearranged, mixed with Jake's increasingly panicked attempts to explain the situation to his business associates. "I'm sorry, I don't understand. This is my dog, but he's supposed to be in Denver with Mayo God. Rex, get down from there." A crash suggested that Rex had discovered Jake's room service cart. Margaret's phone rang. "Mom." Jake's voice was barely controlled panic. "What is happening? Why is Rex in London? How did he get here?" "Oh, hello, darling," Margaret said pleasantly. "How's your vacation going?" "My vacation?" "Mom, there's a 90-pound dog destroying my hotel room. My colleagues think I've lost my mind. How did Rex get to London?" "Well, it's quite simple," Margaret explained, settling comfortably into one of her suite's plush armchairs. "You left Rex with me, assuming I would handle all the responsibility while you enjoyed yourself. But I realized I hadn't had a proper vacation in years, so I decided to take one in London. With Rex." The sound of more breaking glass carried up from Jake's room. "You brought Rex to London, Mom? This is insane. You can't just—" "Oh, but I can," Margaret interrupted smoothly. "You see, Jake, when you dump responsibilities on other people without asking, you lose the right to control how those responsibilities are handled. I'm taking a vacation. Since Rex is your dog, he's now your responsibility. Fully, but I'm in meetings. I have presentations. This is a business trip." "Funny," Margaret mused. "That's not what it sounded like when I heard you in the bar earlier, telling your friends how convenient it was to stick your mother with dog-sitting duties while you celebrated your promotion." The silence from Jake's room was broken only by what sounded like Rex's enthusiastic exploration of the minibar. "You were... you heard." "I hear many things, Jake, including the sound of a young man who's forgotten that actions have consequences, and that other people's time and homes are not his personal resources to exploit." "Mom, please, you have to help me. I don't know how to handle Rex in a hotel room. He's going crazy down here." Margaret looked at the manila envelope she'd prepared, the deed to her home, along with documentation of every expense she'd absorbed. For Jake's benefit over the years, the plan was working perfectly, but she realized she wasn't quite finished with the lesson. "Jake, I'm going to give you a choice," she said calmly. "You can figure out how to handle Rex on your own, all the walking, feeding, supervision, and damage control that I've been doing for the past 2 days, or what?" Margaret smiled, looking out at the London skyline. "Or you can come up to the royal suite, and we can discuss what it really means to be responsible for the people and commitments in your life." Another crash from below, followed by Rex's joyful barking and what sounded like Jake's muffled cursing. "The royal suite, Mom. What have you done?" "I've taken control of my own life, Jake. The question is, what are you going to do about yours?" The line went quiet except for the sounds of chaos from room 847. Margaret waited, champagne glass in hand, for her son to make his choice. 20 minutes later, Margaret heard the soft knock she'd been expecting. When she opened the door to the Royal Suite. Jake stood in the hallway looking like he'd been through a natural disaster. His expensive business shirt was wrinkled and stained, his hair disheveled, and there were what appeared to be dog treats stuck to his sleeve. Behind him, Rex sat perfectly, tail wagging, apparently pleased with the evening's adventures. "Mom," Jake began, then stopped. Taking in the opulent surroundings of the Royal Suite, his eyes widened as he processed the scale and expense of his mother's accommodations. "This room probably costs more per night than most people make in a month." "Probably." Margaret agreed pleasantly, stepping aside to let them in. "Would you like some champagne?" "I ordered a bottle of the 1996 Dom Perignon. It seemed appropriate for such a special occasion." Jake walked slowly into the suite, Rex trotting beside him, both of them looking slightly shocked. "Mom, I need to understand what's happening here. You flew to London with Rex and booked the most expensive room in one of the most expensive hotels in the world. This isn't like you." Margaret poured herself a glass of champagne deliberately, taking her time. "You're right, Jake. The old me would never have done this. The old me would have spent 3 weeks cleaning up after your dog, dealing with noise complaints from neighbors, replacing damaged furniture, and never saying a word about it because I didn't want to burden you during your important business trip." "But this isn't a business trip," Jake said quietly. "No, it isn't." Margaret settled into one of the suite's elegant chairs, gesturing for Jake to sit across from her. Rex, apparently deciding the humans needed space for their conversation, found a spot by the fireplace and lay down with a contented sigh. "It's a celebration trip for your promotion," Margaret continued, "which you could have simply told me about. Instead of constructing an elaborate story about client presentations and business requirements, Jake sat heavily in the opposite chair, looking younger than his 32 years. "How did you know?" "I heard you in the bar downstairs, explaining to your colleagues how convenient it was that your mother loves dogs and would be thrilled to watch Rex while you celebrated." Margaret's voice remained calm, but Jake winced at her words. "Except, I don't particularly love dogs, Jake, and I wasn't consulted about whether I'd be thrilled to watch Rex." "Mom, Let me finish." Margaret opened the manila envelope she'd prepared, spreading documents across the coffee table between them. "Do you know what these are?" Jake leaned forward, recognition dawning as he identified various papers. "Those are house documents, insurance papers, the deed to my home, insurance policies, property tax records, maintenance receipts for the last 5 years. Margaret picked up a thick folder, "and this contains documentation of every expense I've covered for you since you graduated college, phone bills, car insurance, the deposit on your first apartment, student loan payments when you were between jobs, medical expenses when you didn't have coverage." Jake's face was growing pale as Margaret continued laying out papers. "Emergency, loans that became gifts, groceries during your ramen noodle months, the down payment assistance for your condo." Margaret opened another folder. "Credit card payments when you overextended yourself, the vacation to Cancun you charged to my card and promised to pay back, the new laptop when yours crashed during your job search." "Mom, stop." "This folder," Margaret continued relentlessly, "contains every birthday gift, Christmas present, and spontaneous purchase I've made for you over the years. Conservative estimate, $47,000 since you graduated college." Jake was staring at the papers spread across the table as if they were evidence in a criminal trial. I didn't realize ... Of course you didn't realize, because I never asked you to realize. I never presented you with a bill or demanded repayment, or even mentioned the running total." Margaret's voice remained steady, but there was steel underneath. "I was happy to help my son build his life. But somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing it as help and started seeing it as an entitlement." Rex lifted his head, apparently sensing the emotional weight of the conversation, then settled back down. "The house where you grew up," Margaret continued, "the home you casually use for storage, for last-minute favors, for dumping responsibilities you don't want to handle, that house represents 30 years of mortgage payments, maintenance, property taxes, and care. It's not a free resource, Jake. It's the foundation of everything you've taken for granted." Jake finally looked up from the papers. "What are you saying?" Margaret reached for the deed to her Denver home and placed it prominently in the center of the table. "I'm saying that if you want to treat my home as your personal convenience, then you need to understand what that home costs to maintain. Not just financially, but in terms of responsibility, commitment, and care." "Mom, you're scaring me." "Good." Margaret's smile was gentle but implacable. "You should be scared. You should be scared of the idea that the people who love you might stop absorbing the consequences of your choices. You should be scared of what your life would look like if you actually had to handle your own responsibilities." Jake looked around the luxurious suite, understanding beginning to dawn. "How much is this room costing? More per night than you've ever spent on a gift for me? And the flight?" bringing Rex internationally. More than you've ever spent on anything for anyone other than yourself. Jake was quiet for a long moment, the weight of the evening's revelations settling over him. Below them, London's nightlights twinkled along the Thames, a reminder of how far they'd traveled from their usual dynamic. I need you to understand something, Margaret said softly. This isn't about money, Jake. It's about respect. It's about recognizing that other people's time, energy, and resources have value. It's about understanding that love isn't an unlimited bank account you can withdraw from without ever making a deposit. I do love you, Mom. I know you do. But love without consideration, without reciprocity, without basic respect for boundaries, that's not love, Jake. That's just selfishness with good intentions. Rex stretched and padded over to Jake, resting his massive head on Jake's knee. Almost automatically, Jake began scratching behind Rex's ears. He really did destroy your house, didn't he? Jake asked. 3 days of chaos. Broken furniture, destroyed rugs, sleepless nights, angry neighbors, and you know what the worst part was? Your assumption that I would handle it all without complaint. While you enjoyed yourself, Jake was quiet, processing finally. What do you want me to do? Margaret gathered the papers from the table, returning them to their folders. I want you to take responsibility. Real responsibility. For Rex, for your choices, for the impact of those choices on other people. Okay, how? Well, for starters, Rex is your dog. You'll need to arrange for his care for the remainder of your London trip. No more assumptions that someone else will handle the difficult parts of your life. Jake nodded slowly. And the damage to your house? We'll address that when we return to Denver, along with a longer conversation about boundaries, expectations, and what our relationship looks like going forward. Are you ... Are you disowning me? Margaret's expression softened. Jake, I flew across an ocean with your dog to teach you a lesson. Does that sound like someone who's given up on you? It sounds like someone who's completely lost her mind. Maybe. Or maybe it sounds like someone who loves you enough to stop enabling your worst impulses. Margaret stood up, moving to the suite's windows overlooking the Thames. You're a smart, capable, successful man. Jake, but you've been coasting on other people's support for so long that you've forgotten how to be truly independent. Jake joined her at the window, Rex trailing behind them. So what now? Now you. Figure out how to be a responsible dog owner while finishing your London trip. You arrange for proper pet care. You handle the logistics. And you deal with any consequences, including the significant damage Rex has already done to your hotel room. Jake winced. About that ... The Savoy's management wants to speak with me. Tomorrow morning, something about replacing several pieces of antique furniture and a complete carpet cleaning, and I have no idea how I'm going to afford it. My company card covers the room and meals, but damages... Jake ran his hand through his hair. Mom, I might need to borrow. No. The word hung in the air between them like a physical barrier. Jake, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Your first instinct, even now, even after everything we've just discussed, is to turn to me to solve your problem. But I don't have that kind of money readily available. If the Savoy charges me for damages, it could be thousands of pounds. Margaret returned to her chair, Rex following and settling at her feet. Then you'll need to figure out a solution. Call your bank about extending credit. Arrange a payment plan with the hotel. Sell something. Work overtime when you get back to Denver. Handle it yourself, Mom, please. I get the lesson, I really do. But this is serious financial trouble. And whose fault is that? Jake opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. The answer was obvious, and they both knew it. I brought Rex to London because I wanted you to understand what responsibility feels like when you can't pass it off to someone else. Margaret continued. This financial consequence, this is what responsibility looks like. You own a dog. You pay for the damage the dog causes. You make a choice. You handle the results. Jake sank back into his chair, the reality of his situation settling over him. I could lose my job if I can't pay the hotel charges. They'll think I'm financially irresponsible. Are you financially irresponsible? Yes, I guess I am. It was the first completely honest thing Jake had said all evening. Margaret felt her heart softened slightly, but she held firm. Then this is your opportunity to learn a different way of living. Rex will be an excellent teacher. Dogs require daily care, consistent attention, and they don't care about your convenience or your schedule. What about you? Are you staying in London? Margaret smiled, looking around the opulent suite. I'm taking a real vacation for the first time in 5 years. I'm going to see the Tower of London, visit the British Museum, take high tea at Fortnum and Mason. I'm going to enjoy myself without worrying about anyone else's problems. And Rex is your responsibility. Completely, you'll need to find pet-friendly accommodations for the rest of your stay. arrange for his exercise and care, and handle all the logistics of getting him back to Denver. Jake looked down at Rex, who gazed back with the trusting eyes of a dog who had no idea he was the center of a life lesson. I don't know how to do any of that. Then you'll learn. People manage dogs in cities all over the world. Jake, you're intelligent and resourceful. Figure it out. Margaret stood up and walked to the suite's elegant writing desk, where she pulled out hotel stationery and began writing. I'm leaving you a list of pet services in London, some phone numbers for dog-friendly hotels, and the contact information for Rex's veterinarian in Denver. Everything else is up to you. As she wrote, Jake sat in silence, the magnitude of his situation becoming clear. No safety net, no one to call for help, no way to transfer the responsibility to someone else. Mom, he said finally, I'm sorry. I'm really, genuinely sorry. Not just for Rex, but for all of it. The way I've been treating you, taking advantage of your help, assuming you'd always be there to fix my problems. Margaret looked up from her writing. I'll always be here for you, Jake, but there's a difference between being here for you and being your personal cleanup service. I know. I'm starting to understand that. Good. Margaret finished her list and handed it to him because Rex isn't going anywhere. He's your dog, and he's going to need care and attention for the next 10 to 15 years. No more dropping him off when he becomes inconvenient. Jake took the paper, scanning the list of London pet services. This is going to be expensive. Most worthwhile things are. And difficult. Most important things are. Jake was quiet for a moment, then looked up at his mother with something like, admiration, flying across the ocean to teach me a lesson is pretty badass. Margaret laughed, the first genuine laugh she'd had since Rex had appeared in her living room. I prefer to think of it as creative parenting. How long have you been planning this? Since about hour 6 of Rex's howling marathon, I realized that if I was going to be miserable, I might as well be miserable somewhere beautiful while making a point. Jake stood up, Rex immediately alert and ready for whatever adventure came next. I should get back to my room and start making phone calls. And, clean up whatever Rex destroyed while I was up here. Jake. He turned back. I love you. That's why I'm doing this. I love you too, Mom, and I'm going to do better. Margaret watched from her balcony as Jake and Rex made their way back to the 8th floor. Through Jake's open French doors, she could see him on the phone, presumably with one of the pet services on her list. Rex was exploring his new environment with slightly less enthusiasm than before, perhaps sensing that playtime was over and responsibility had begun. Over the next few days, Margaret enjoyed the vacation she'd promised herself. She toured Westminster, Abbey explored the markets of Camden, and spent an afternoon at the Tate Modern. Each evening, she would hear updates from Jake's room, below phone calls to pet services, conversations with hotel management, the logistics of caring for a large dog in an unfamiliar city. On their 3rd day in London, Jake knocked on her door, Rex at his side. Both looked tired but somehow more settled. How's it going? Margaret asked, letting them in. It's hard, Jake admitted. Really hard. I had to move to a pet-friendly hotel across town. It's not as nice as the Savoy, and it's costing me a fortune. But they're okay with Rex. I hired a dog walker for the days. I have meetings, and I've been getting up early to take him to Hyde Park. And the Savoy, Jake winced. Expensive lesson. Very expensive. I'm going to be paying it off for months. But you're handling it yourself? I set up a payment plan with the hotel and arranged a personal loan from my bank. No bailouts, no emergency calls to family, just me dealing with the consequences of my choices. Margaret felt a surge of pride. How does that feel? Terrifying and ... kind of good? Like I'm actually in control of my life instead of just hoping someone else will handle the difficult parts. Rex had made himself comfortable on the suite's Persian rug, apparently content to listen to the humans talk. I've been thinking about what you said, Jake continued, about respect and boundaries and taking people for granted. I think I've been doing it my whole life, not just with you. Oh, my relationships, my friendships, even at work. I've been assuming that if I'm charming enough or apologetic enough, people will just absorb the inconvenience of my poor planning and irresponsibility. Margaret settled into her chair, recognizing the importance of this moment. And now? Now I'm wondering how many people I've lost because they got tired of being my backup plan. Jake looked down at Rex, who had rolled over to expose his belly. 4 scratches? This guy doesn't care if I'm charming or apologetic. He just needs food, water, exercise, and attention. Every day, no matter what else I have going on. That's what responsibility looks like, Jake. It's not about grand gestures or good intentions. It's about showing up consistently, even when it's inconvenient. I get it now, I really do. Jake looked up at his mother. I want to do better, not just with Rex, but with everything. With my relationships, with my life, I believe you. Really? You've spent 3 days in London dealing with problems instead of asking someone else to solve them. That's progress. Jake smiled, the first genuinely relaxed smile Margaret had seen from him since his arrival. So what happens when we get back to Denver? We start over. New rules, new expectations, new relationship. You're Rex's owner, which means you're responsible for his care, his training, his veterinary needs, and any damage he causes. No exceptions. And the damage to your house, you'll make it right. Not because I'm demanding it, but because that's what responsible people do when their choices affect others. Jake nodded seriously. I can do that. I know you can. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching Rex enjoy his belly rub. London's afternoon light streaming through the suite's windows. Mom, Jake said finally. Yes, thank you. For caring enough to teach me this lesson, for not giving up on me. Margaret smiled, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders that she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying. Thank you for being willing to learn. So, Jake said, standing up and clipping Rex's leash to his collar, I should let you get back to your vacation. I have a dog to walk and some adulting to do. Jake, yeah, I'm proud of you. As Jake and Rex headed for the door, Rex paused and looked back at Margaret with what might have been gratitude. Or maybe he was just hoping for more treats. Come on, Rex, Jake said, and for the first time, his voice carried the authority of someone who had accepted responsibility rather than someone who was avoiding it. Margaret watched them go, then turned back to her spectacular view of London. Tomorrow, she would fly back to Denver to her damaged house, her disrupted routine, and her changed relationship with her son. But tonight, she was going to order room service, take a long bath in the marble tub, and enjoy the satisfaction of a lesson well taught. Outside her window, London sparkled with possibilities. And for the first time in years, so did Margaret's relationship with her son. Rex was going to be an excellent teacher. 6 months later, Margaret's Denver home had been fully restored, paid for entirely by Jake, who had taken on extra freelance work to cover the costs. Rex had graduated from obedience training and become a surprisingly well-behaved member of the household when Jake brought him for weekly visits. The visits themselves had changed. Jake now called ahead, asked about convenient times, and brought groceries or cooked dinner. He'd started a savings account for emergencies instead of relying on family bailouts. Most importantly, he'd learned to say, I can't afford that right now, instead of, can you help me out? Margaret still kept the photos from their London adventure, Jake looking frazzled in the Savoy's lobby. Rex sprawled across the royal suite's Persian rug, the itemized bill for hotel damages that had taught her son the true cost of responsibility. But her favorite photo was the one Jake had taken of her at the Tower of London. Champagne glass in hand, looking like a woman who had finally decided to put herself first. It had been an expensive lesson for both of them, but it had been worth every penny.